Three Fort Music Fest is almost here. The festival will take over downtown from March 20th to the 24th. Come discover hundreds of bands with me. I bet you'll find a bunch of new faves. Think of it as a real-life playlist from your coolest friend. 5-day passes start at $295, but it's not just about the music. From beer to comedy to food and tech, there's lots to explore. Check out the lineup and snag your ticket today at treefortmusicfest.com.
Today on CityCast Boise, Boise State Public Radio's George Prentice joins me to break down the big stories of the week. We hit the latest updates on the building collapse near the Boise airport, another round of anti-library legislation, and that mess-up with the Amtrak line to Salt Lake City. It's Friday, February 9th. I'm Nick Kwa, and this is what Boise's talking about. Morning, George. How you doing?
I'm well, Nick. How are you?
Doing all right. It's kind of been a busy week. Lots going on, and I hear you on the radio every morning, and it seems that you were sort of covering a lot of ground this week.
It's the hardest, best job in traditional broadcasting, right? I start my day as the world reinvents itself.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's a very beautiful way to look at it.
Yeah.
So, okay, there's no easy way to start this one because it's we're going to start with the story of the building collapse over at the airport. It seems to be still a little fast moving. There's a lot happening around there. Just to sort of reset the context here. So last Wednesday, a construction site, I believe, collapsed at a private jet hangar near the airport. There were 3 deaths and 9 injured. What's the update with that story, George?
Well, we know, and I guess we shouldn't be surprised that families of 2 of the victims have already secured legal representation. And the first shot across the bow is in the form of a press conference or an announcement saying that people will be held accountable. Well, the shorthand of that is, the contractor, right? What's interesting and sad is that the 3rd victim is a member of the family of the contractors,
right,
of the construction company. So there are so many layers to this. But I really want to talk for a second about OSHA, Occupational Safety and Hazard Administration, which is overseeing the entire investigation. Boise Fire has basically turned the scene over to OSHA. I've been lucky over the years to have gotten to know the man who's in charge of OSHA in Idaho, David Kearns. And as probably a good many people have heard, these investigations are capped at 30 days.
Right.
So it starts from, the incident itself, and then the clock starts running. 30 days can seem like eternity for people who desperately want answers. And it can also seem like eternity for the media who just want to keep, updating the story.
Right.
But it is a very dense 30 days. And the investigations and the interviews and the data that's involved, I followed a couple of these from the very beginning a number of years ago, and it was stunning to learn, 20-hour days were the norm.
Yeah, help me understand what exactly is being investigated. So when OSHA goes out to look into an incident like this, what are they gathering specifically?
Well, it is forensics, which is to say it starts with history, and sometimes that has to do with the history, the integrity of the property. And so we do know, for instance, because I spoke to the folks at City Hall, that they actually did inspections at that site last fall and up to, I think, December. And the reason for that is, and here comes another wrinkle, is that the land is City of Boise land.
Right.
It is leased to this company, this private jet company, which was building a new hangar. So there's that. So the city was very quick to say that, yes, we did inspections of this. Basically, if you think of it, kind of the scene before the construction began, and everything seemed to be okay. And all their I's were dotted. And they would not go back until that construction job was done. That said, OSHA probably begins with those records. They'll no doubt get into the history of this construction company. And
right.
The media has really been stoking that flame, which is to say this construction company has had previous incidents where they have been.
And that was information gleaned from public records.
Public records, absolutely. And it has to be. And OSHA's the first one to put this stuff in the front window for everybody to see. So should we conclude anything from that? Absolutely not. Because they are investigations. Let's assume that there were fines paid, and they're not going to let a company go back to work unless changes are made. But that said, those are stains. And I think that you cannot not include that as part of the investigation. A big part of it will be witnesses, other construction workers, and we know that there are survivors of this incident who will have very specific memory. And it's very interesting how and when you want to interview someone who has been in such a traumatic event as this. Sometimes you want to talk to them as soon as possible, but more often than not, you want to give them a few days because the brain is the brain.
So as citizens sort of attending to the story and thinking about it, what you're counseling here basically is just to sort of take a beat and not rush to conclusions and just sort of let the process play out. And at this point, there will be a legal process coming from the family of the dead. And it does seem like the way that the narrative is shaped in the public, like it it might complicate how we understand what exactly was the problem here. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. And if I may just talk for a moment about OSHA, there is an event every year, and it's in the springtime. I think it's usually first week of May. And it is an event to remember Idaho workers who died on the job in a given year. And while we have this very high-profile, horrible event near the Boise airport, it's important to remember that dozens of Idaho workers lose their lives on the job most years. Many of them agricultural workers, certainly construction industry workers, and law enforcement and firefighters, et cetera. And it's an event that does not get a lot of press. I wish it did, because these are stories worth telling. But the fact is, way too many men and women lose their lives on the job in Idaho every year. We're talking about these three, and we mourn them, but we also need to remember that there are dozens of others every year.
Got it. And I just want to sort of make sure that we sort of mention that two of the dead, the ones who retained families, they're from Guatemala originally.
There's another layer there too, right, of workers who come to this country with a dream and a possibility, and how many of them are on construction sites, et cetera, and doing the heavy lifting, literally the heavy lifting, and putting their lives in jeopardy.
And you cannot disentangle this from the larger story about sort of the migration flow that's happening from primarily Latin America into the United States.
Absolutely. And and we should be the first to say thank you. Thank you so much for being here and for doing the work that so many others won't.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Speaking of which, and I just want to broaden this out to trying to sort of connect this, I guess, to another ongoing story about just building inspections and constructions in Boise. It seems that we're getting a spate of these rather confusing and honestly like a little bit contentious stories about the fidelity of Boise building inspection a little bit. George, what's your thinking on how to think about a relationship between these two stories?
Well, here's the thing, is that less than 24 hours before this horrible accident near the airport, there was a hearing at Boise City Hall in regards to the future of the Union Block. And I think a lot of people will remember that this is the historical building, more than a century old, right in downtown Boise, that was declared unsafe.
Condemned.
To the degree, condemned. I mean, even the sidewalk is closed off. And restaurants were told, sorry, got to get out of here, businesses closed down, et cetera. So the owner of the Union Block appealed this, and in city code in the city of Boise, appeals go straight to the city council, in spite of the fact that they're not exactly engineers up on that dais. But the head of the city's building division stood before council last Tuesday evening and painted it was horrifying, And all I wish I could do is encourage people to find the audio file from last Tuesday's City Council meeting and listen to this presentation. The word picture that he painted, I was horrified when I heard this. All I could do was picture this building collapsing. And then, less than 24 hours, we actually had a very, very different scene, but a collapse.
Yeah.
And it was just, oh my gosh, you cannot not think about potential disaster when you look at the disasters that do happen. And so it's an important process. I mean, for God's sakes, there are reasons that we inspect elevators. There are reasons we inspect construction sites. There are reasons for all of this. And for those people who want less government, well, guess what? This is why government does exist.
George, I'm wondering if there is a systemic story here about building inspection process in general, because I'm still struggling to see the link between, like, how as citizens should we think about like how robust these building inspections have been going, because it's hard to look at the Union Block building, not make a connection with what happened over at the hangar, and kind of just ask, like, are the processes in place enough already, or has it been going well? Like, how do you think about stuff like that?
Really good question, because would the Union Block building have been condemned if the city did not have authority over that historic footprint? And, you know, what is the integrity of private structures, let alone public ones? Yeah, we should think about these things more often, and inspections are important, but I am thankful that they condemned that building after hearing what I heard, number one. And basically what I heard between the lines was they dodged a bullet.
Yeah.
They dodged a big bullet, because when you hear about the integrity or the lack thereof in this building that's in the centerpiece of Boise's downtown core, and there were restaurants and there were businesses and people walking outside, et cetera. And it's like, oh my goodness.
TIAA is on a mission. Why? Because 54% of Black Americans don't have enough savings to retire. So in collaboration with big-name artists like Wyclef Jean, TIAA released Paper Right, new music inspiring a new financial future. With 100% of streaming sales going to a nonprofit that teaches students how to invest. Stream Paper Right now and help close the gap.
Shipping can make or break a sale, so optimize how you ship your orders with ShipStation. They make it easy to automate and manage orders no matter how big your business grows. And they might even be able to help reduce shipping and warehouse costs. So optimize and keep up your momentum for growth with ShipStation. Sign up for your free 60-day trial now at ShipStation.com and use the code POD. That's ShipStation.com with the code POD.
I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about another story that really caught my attention from this past week. I'm still thinking about it. I'm still kind of angry about it, to be honest.
Yeah.
And it's the story that has to do with Amtrak. So originally, there was a push. We were supposed to have a push to explore the possibility of funding a possible route between Salt Lake City and Boise. There was a lot of excitement over this project, and I believe an application was supposed to have been submitted last March to the federal government to get grant funding or funding just to research and to perhaps ideate this out. And it turns out, according to a story first reported in Boise Dev, turns out the federal government didn't turn down the grant application, which is what we thought happened earlier this year. But what actually happened was that somebody at the Idaho Transportation Department filed the grant application to the wrong place. Is that your understanding of the story?
That's exactly right. And we're talking about the State Department of Idaho Department of Transportation, because all of these applications have to funnel through them. Somebody screwed up, and ITD said as much, but they're also saying, hey, look, it happens. Does it really? I was
going to ask, have you ever heard of something like this happening in your years covering the city?
Yeah, I mean, I've covered stories where people have screwed up, et cetera, but this was pretty high profile. This was a story. I got to tell you that in CityCast, covered this process and this application really well as well. And and I covered it too. I was a little surprised that we didn't get it. I thought that, wow, this arrangement that the city of Boise has with Salt Lake City, this might be the secret sauce. And then for them just like, nope, they didn't get it. It's like, oh, I was like disappointed. And then I'm just thinking, golly, was it that bad? Because for those of us who have paid attention to this effort, that sounded like a pretty good idea.
Yeah, it sounded like a bullseye. It made too much sense, honestly.
So now, not only do you have people in the city of Boise upset at ITD, you've got the city of Salt Lake City that's upset at them as well.
Absolutely.
Will somebody lose their job? We'll probably never know. ITD is also saying, I think the governor's office said, we'll be able to apply again. And I'm thinking, really? I don't think windows for this happen too often, especially, administrations change. And right now we have an administration that is public transportation friendly and likes rail and et cetera. And it's like, wow, I thought like all the boxes were being checked here, and then boom.
Yeah, and again, let's just sort of like say it out loud, like this is a presidential election year, right? The reason why we had this opportunity was because of the Biden administration, the IRA, essentially, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is really an infrastructure funding act for the most part.
Amtrak came to Boise twice.
Absolutely.
And toured, et cetera. They actually went to the smaller towns along the southern tier of Idaho. I was thinking, golly, this sounds like they might actually have a shot at this.
Yeah, and I want to impress like how tenuous this feels actually, right? Like, we don't know what's going to happen with the elections this year. Stuff like this takes a very long time. We're talking about huge sums of money operating over long time scales involving many, many parties and actors. And I do want to emotionally hold out and have empathy. And yes, people do make mistakes. But this is a really big one for a very important thing that can mean a lot of jobs and a lot of goodwill for a lot of people.
Yeah, and so you can only imagine, right, the scenario of what's happening. Someone, a worker, a state employee, is trying to dismiss this. Their supervisor is probably trying to give them some cover, that person's manager, et cetera. But, golly, try to not think about that when this person's review comes up.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh boy. All right. So switching gears a little bit, as negative a feeling that story leaves me with, we're going into another fairly infuriating story, which is the ongoing and continued attack on libraries over at the Idaho Capitol. There's some movement this week. And again, the context here is that we've seen repeated waves at this point, repeated efforts to introduce legislation bills that really strips away at, I guess, the autonomy, the power, the resources, the ability for libraries here to function, public libraries specifically function. George, what is the latest exactly in the story? I believe there was a new bill introduced this week.
Yep. A new, let's call it what it is. It is another library porn bill introduced on Wednesday in this particular iteration, and it's not too different. As a matter of fact, it's kind of a combination of the previous two bills that were waylaid. But in this iteration of books, literary, artistic, political, or scientific value will be considered, right? But that's not to say that they will not be questioned. And basically what this bill would require public libraries to do, it would be to establish review committees to consider complaints. And it would have to be done this year. It would have to be done by the end of this year if this were to pass. The Idaho Library Association, again, is saying, this isn't necessary. There's no problem to begin with. And they're doing nothing wrong. So says the ILA, and I had an opportunity to talk to a couple of officers with the ILA. And
that's the Idaho Libraries Association, by the way. Yeah.
Yes, including their legislative liaison who does all of their testimony. But it is what it is, right? And the question I have is, how many complaints are we talking about here? And where are these complaints coming from? And it turns out that many of these complaints are the same complaint times 2 or times 3. So in this public hearing for this bill, I'd be really curious to hear, okay, what are we talking about? And because we keep hearing these same scenarios that quite frankly, are talking points from outside of Idaho.
Right. And these are just hypotheticals.
Yes.
These are boogeyman scenarios. Even the sort of framing of the bill, like the library porn bill,
Sure.
like it's such a pregnant word and it's so weaponizable. And could you just set the scene a little bit more of like, if I was hearing about this situation for the first time, maybe I tuned out 30,000 foot exactly what is happening. What exactly is the process at play here? Like, what are Republicans trying to do, really?
They're trying to demonize libraries. We went from teachers to healthcare workers to librarians, and I wouldn't even say Republicans. I would say a very particular sliver.
An extreme wing of the Republicans, one would say.
Maybe not even. They might not even have anything to do with the Republican Party. That's how extreme it is. As a matter of fact, I think more than a few Republicans. I believe, by the way, that this is a bridge too far for many Republicans, and much like what we saw with Medicaid expansion a number of years ago. If you and I were to canvass this state and spend, say, 30 days just on the road, I bet we would find as many Republicans as Democrats saying, there's no problem here.
Right.
Thank God for public libraries. I am who I am because of a public library. Which is very interesting because it just so happens that this coming Saturday, the Idaho Library Association had scheduled, and they're still going to hold it, a Support Idaho Library event at Boise Brewing in downtown Boise. Now, I would hope that that's standing room only. But here's an opportunity to say, yeah, thank you, librarian, because it's going to be filled with librarians there, right? And but it's a ripe opportunity for people to weigh in on this. Because we're wondering, where is this coming from? And by the way, the Library Association recently did a survey of their own that was sad because it did show that across the state, and I got this directly from one of their officers, library staff in all different types of libraries are feeling demoralized and to the point where they're really reconsidering their career choice. Nick, I can honestly say that I am not the person I am, let alone what I do for a living, without a library being a part of my formative years and to this day, my life. And there's a lot at stake here. So I think, it's another library porn bill, but this is much bigger than this bill.
And I just want to sort of reiterate and sort of bring back what the sort of Boise State University Public Policy Survey put out a couple of weeks ago.
Yes.
That most Idahoans trust libraries. They're perfectly fine with what's happening. They're perfectly fine with the administrators there to make the right judgment. And this seems just like a horrible push of legislation that is honestly very anti-human. And
we have library boards that are elected, right? For oversight. It's like, what part of this are they not doing already as far as oversight? Thank goodness for librarians who recognize that not all families are the same. Not all 7-year-olds are the same. But with discretion and, most importantly, expertise. These are people who do this for a living. It's not a hobby. This is what they do for a living.
Absolutely. George, you've also been tracking a few other stories at the Capitol that have kind of flown under the radar. Could you walk me through just a couple of them really quickly?
This one caught my eye, and I think we're going to hear about this in the coming weeks. There is a proposal to basically rewrite Idaho's human trafficking laws. And it is a thick bill because, this is many parts of Idaho code. But a big part of it is a change in definition. And so they want to take the word prostitution out of human trafficking laws. They're striking that phrase, prostitution or prostitute, so that we can avoid victims and we don't have to re-victimize people when we are investigating. We want to make sure that when we're talking about it, that we're sensitive and not labeling people in such a way that even harms them more than already what they've gone through. So I'm going to be keeping a real close eye on that. I think that's really interesting. And they also want to include new parts of the human trafficking laws to include more labor trafficking as well. Earlier we were talking about migration, and that's very much a part of this. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on that. And Nick, you may remember last election cycle, we in Boise had more than a few confused voters who went to the polls and actually argued with poll workers saying, where's the city council race? Because we changed city council races by district, part of that change also said, well, if you're running unopposed, you won't even be on a ballot.
Right, which never made sense to me, which never made sense to a lot of people.
Yes, and, people like to put their pencil to the paper, or even write in an alternative or not vote. But for God's sakes, it's their choice. So they're trying to rewind that part of the change and say, yes, we're going to put these names back on ballots.
Fantastic.
And in the hearing earlier this week, we heard a number of scenarios of polling places all across Boise where people actually had arguments with their poll workers. And there were some people who thought that they had gone to the wrong precinct. Well, this is a problem. This is a big problem. You think, it's just kind of like, administrative. No, that's a problem, because if it's chilling the voting process, my gosh, that's the heart of democracy.
Oh, boy. Well, that's actually something to look forward to, honestly.
Yeah.
We'll love to see that, actually, to see that reversed. George, thanks for walking me through this sort of suite of pretty heavy stories this week. But, we like to sort of end these things on a kind of a lighter note so that we can bounce into the weekend. Pretty big weekend, pretty packed weekend. It's Lunar New Year, the first day of Lunar New Year for me at least, and I'll be celebrating by cooking a bunch of food. And it's also a Super Bowl. I'm not a big Super Bowl person, but I am a big Super Bowl snacking person. George, what would you be doing this weekend?
I will be watching the Super Bowl. I have actually attended and covered 4 Super Bowls. Mostly because I was working in Buffalo at the time when the Buffalo Bills went to a series of Super Bowls. And
well, I don't think I ever knew this. Are you a football person?
Yeah. Oh gosh, yeah. Oh yeah.
Wait, who's your team?
And when you, the Bills, the Buffalo Bills. And so when they lost in the playoffs with that, by missing the field goal, by not tying, is because that's exactly how they lost a Super Bowl too. A little piece of me died again. So
re-traumatized.
Should I root for the Chiefs? Yeah, but they beat the Bills. But okay, I get that. But I am a purist. I love a good game. There's nothing worse than just a blowout. That said, I love a really sassy commercial too, and sometimes one or two will emerge from the Super Bowl. So I'm kind of looking forward to those. I hate the fact that there's 3 or 4 hours of a pregame show. I don't think it should be elevated to, being a national holiday that some people think it should be. But yeah, I'm all about the game. You bet.
Oh, good. I mean, it's a good time. One of my favorite things about a Super Bowl actually is sometimes if you dip out in the second or third quarter just to drive around, Boise is so empty, and what a lovely thing to take in.
Oh, yeah. That is when to do the Greenbelt. That is when to go to the
absolutely.
Park. That's when to go to the movies, quite frankly.
Well, that's a nice takeaway to end us on. If you're itching to go for a nice lonely walk this Sunday, you're considered the second or third quarter of the Super Bowl. George, thank you so much for taking time to talk to me. And it's always a pleasure to have you on.
It was great, Nick. Thanks for letting me go off leash for a few minutes.
Absolutely. That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. The show was produced by Evelyn Avitia, Frankie Barnhill, Grant Irving, Dylan Bergen, and me, Nick Kwa. Blake Hunter writes our Hey Boise newsletter with editing help from Andrea Salenzi and Brian Vance. And our music is by Up Is the Down Is the. Be sure to check out our website for a roundup of Boise's favorite pizza joints. We'll be back Monday with more stories from around the city. Have a great weekend.